I remember the exact moment everything shifted, though at the time, I couldn't have said why. It was Thanksgiving, the kind that feels small and ordinary until the edges start to fray. I was 28, and my name's Lila. I had spent the morning in the kitchen with my mom, peeling potatoes and scraping the edges of the mixing bowls with a precision only years of cooking with someone you both love and fear can teach you. My dad sat at the table, scrolling through his phone, nodding at the occasional football update without looking up. The house smelled like sage and roasted turkey, but underneath, there was the subtle tension, a stiffness in the air I didn't recognize at first. "You know," my dad said without looking up, "maybe it's time you learned what real independence feels like. Go live in the streets for a while. See what it's like to survive without everything handed to you." I froze mid-peel. My hand hovered over the potato like it had turned to ice. I had heard a lot from them over the years, but this was different. I wanted to laugh it off, but the smirk stuck in my throat. It was quiet, barely a threat, more like a whisper sliding through a cracked window, but it carried weight. My mom glanced at him, a flicker of hesitation in her eyes, then returned to her chopping. "Don't mind him," she said. "He's old-fashioned." Old-fashioned. Right. I smiled anyway, the kind of smile you give when your heart is making a list of questions it doesn't want to ask out loud. "Sure," I said. "I'll consider it." And just like that, the words were out, light as dust, but they landed hard somewhere between the kitchen tiles in my chest. After dinner, I retreated to my room, trying to shake it off, trying to convince myself it was just my dad being dramatic. But the thing about words like that, they stick. They burrow. And the more I thought about it, the angrier I got. My mind, which usually kept its fury in neat little drawers, started rifling through the past, finding all the ways I had been underestimated. By midnight, I was pacing the apartment I'd rented for the last 2 years, which, technically, they had helped me set up. My laptop sat on the desk, flickering with notifications. I had been keeping my side hustle quiet. Not exactly a secret, but enough that they thought I was just scraping by. Just scraping by had been my story for years, part performance, part survival. 3 weeks ago, I had closed a deal that changed everything. The truth was, I earned more in a single week than my parents made in a year. $25 million. And they had no idea. The thought made me laugh softly, and then, with that laugh, the first real crack in the veneer appeared. This wasn't just a passing suggestion from my dad, it was a challenge. A dare. They thought I was vulnerable, fragile, dependent. And now I realized, for the first time in years, I could turn that assumption against them. I sank onto my bed, pulling the blankets tight around me, but sleep wouldn't come. I kept picturing my dad's smug expression, my mom's faint, distracted look when she tried to mediate, and then, quietly, the tiny red flag I had missed earlier flared in my mind. In the pile of leftovers in the fridge, among the foil-wrapped turkey slices, there was a note in my father's handwriting. I hadn't looked closely at it before, just assumed it was a shopping list, but now it felt different. The words were simple. "She'll see the streets soon." It wasn't meant for me, at least, that's what my rational brain said. But the moment I read it, something inside me shifted. My safe, measured world suddenly felt like it had a door ajar. I could see into a room I'd never entered, one where I wasn't the spoiled daughter, the cautious girl. In that space, I was unshackled, dangerous even. I leaned over the desk, opening my laptop, and stared at the numbers that no one else would see. The contracts, the accounts, the growing balance that spelled power I hadn't dared to flaunt. A cold clarity washed over me. They thought they could push me out into the streets, break me down, make me small. But I wasn't the same girl who had needed their protection. I was something else now. Then I saw it. A subtle, almost imperceptible alert from one of my accounts. A transfer that shouldn't have been there. My heartbeat doubled. I leaned closer, squinting at the screen. The money was moving, and it wasn't random. It was precise, calculated. Someone was testing me, poking at the door I hadn't yet decided to open fully. And that's when I understood. This wasn't just a dare from my father. Someone had planted a thread, a lure away in. And if I followed it, I couldn't go back. The door had cracked, and the view beyond it was a place I could never unsee. I closed the laptop slowly, my hands trembling, not from fear, but from anticipation. My parents thought they were teaching me a lesson. They had no idea they were about to meet the real Lila. The room went silent, except for the faint hum of the fridge, and in that quiet, I felt it. The first pulse of a plan forming. A pulse that promised reckoning, not survival. And deep down, I knew I was ready. The note, the transfer, the casual cruelty of my father's words, they were pieces of a puzzle. And I had just begun to see the picture. The street was calling. But this time, I wouldn't be running. The next morning, the house felt smaller, heavier, like the walls were leaning in just to listen. I moved through it carefully, pretending everything was normal, flipping pancakes, pouring coffee, nodding at my dad's offhand comments about football stats. My mom hummed quietly, a tune I recognized from my childhood, but even that sounded slightly hollow, like it was echoing off a distance I couldn't bridge. I kept thinking about the transfer. Whoever had moved that money into my account, or maybe tried to, had known enough to get my attention without setting off alarms. That wasn't random. That was deliberate. And the note in the fridge, someone had written it with purpose. My father's handwriting. Yes, but the timing, the placement, it was almost too perfect. Someone wanted me to see it. I didn't know who, but I could feel it weaving a thread through everything I had thought I knew. I decided I needed context. I went through the old folders on my laptop, scanning contracts, emails, and bank statements, paying close attention to patterns I'd overlooked before. A small detail jumped out. A series of withdrawals, just small enough to be overlooked, from my accounts over the last 6 months. All routed through shell companies I had never interacted with. It didn't make sense until I remembered a conversation with my dad from months ago about teaching me responsibility with my finances. He had asked me to let him check on my spending habits. At the time, I brushed it off as normal parental curiosity. But now it gnawed at me. Something about it felt like a rehearsal for what was happening now. I couldn't confront him yet, not without proof. So I did what I always did, I observed. I watched the little cues, the fleeting expressions, the phone calls my dad took in the garage, the hushed whispers my mom exchanged with neighbors when she thought I wasn't listening. One evening, while pretending to fold laundry, I caught a glimpse of a document sticking out from my dad's desk drawer. My pulse spiked. I waited, hard hammering, until he left the room, then slipped the paper into my bag. It was a signed contract, but not the kind I had expected. It was an agreement transferring assets, properties, even my apartment lease under someone else's control. My name was there, but my signature wasn't. I sank onto the bed, staring at it like it might bite me. I'd known there were cracks in the facade of my family, little fissures in trust that I'd ignored, rationalized, excused. But this was betrayal with a capital B, quiet and creeping, like mold in the corner of a room you thought was clean. And suddenly, everything my parents had ever told me about learning to survive and getting real experience felt like camouflage for something darker. I remember the nights when I was younger, trying to balance school and odd jobs, and how my parents had told me I wasn't ready, that I needed guidance. Guidance had been the word they used, but now I saw the other meaning lurking in the spaces between the words. They wanted control. They wanted leverage. They wanted me small. And the realization stung like a sudden winter wind through a cracked window. I needed more. I had to know who was pulling the strings and why. I dug through emails, messages, and even old photo metadata. A tiny timestamp on a shared family photo from last month revealed an exchange I hadn't noticed. A message from my father's email to an unknown account. Something cryptic and transactional, just numbers and codes. My stomach sank. Whoever was on the other end knew more than I did. Whoever it was had been planning this long before Thanksgiving. Late that night, I found myself standing in the kitchen, staring at the fridge, at that note I had almost dismissed. She'll see the streets soon. Those words hadn't been a joke. They were a warning, and now I could feel the edges of it pricking at me like needles. My fingers brushed the fridge handle, tracing the grooves as if the surface could whisper secrets back. The house felt alive in a way it hadn't before, like it was breathing around me, hiding pieces I had never paid attention to. And then I noticed it, a faint, almost imperceptible smudge near the corner of the note. Not dirt, not a fingerprint, but something like residue from a pen that had been lifted too quickly. A signature touch, intentional but meant to be subtle. Someone wanted me to notice, wanted me to start connecting dots. I touched the smear gently, my mind racing. This was a breadcrumb, a deliberate clue left in plain sight. I left the kitchen without making a sound, my pulse quick and steady, not with fear, but with that sharp edge of anticipation I hadn't felt in years. Everything was aligning. The betrayals, the whispers, the hidden contracts, and the transfers, they were pieces of a puzzle that I hadn't even known existed. The quiet tension that had been growing in my chest for weeks now felt like a live wire. By the time I returned to my room, I realized something profound. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I couldn't go back to pretending my family was harmless, that my parents were just misguided. The small details, the odd phrasing, the carefully orchestrated hints, the financial breadcrumbs, had begun to hum together, a low vibration beneath the surface, promising the truth that had always been there, hiding in plain sight. And that hum was loud enough now that I couldn't sleep through it. Something was coming, something that would expose more than just the cracks. It would expose the heart of the house itself, and I was ready to follow it. I woke before sunrise, the way you do when your mind is already halfway out the door. A single clue from the night before kept replaying in my head. The faint smudge on the note, the way it curved at the edge like someone had pressed down too hard before lifting the pen. I'd seen that before. Not in my father's handwriting, but in someone else's. Someone who had been helping my parents organize their finances over the last year. Someone I had shaken hands with once and instantly disliked without knowing why. Arthur Hale, my father's financial advisor. A man with a polished smile and cold eyes that always flicked over me like I was a ledger entry he hadn't approved yet. It wasn't much, but it was enough. A breadcrumb. And I followed it. I left the house quietly, slipping into the chilled morning air with my laptop bag slung over my shoulder. I drove to the office building where Hale kept his practice, a glass-fronted suite overlooking a strip mall. Nothing impressive, but private enough for the kind of deals people didn't want traced. I wasn't breaking in, not physically. I didn't need to. I already had access to the building's guest Wi-Fi, and from the parking lot, that was enough. My hands shook, not from fear, but from the thrill of finally pulling the thread tight. I logged in, accessed the corporate backend I knew Hale used, and waited. Within seconds, the skeleton of his digital life unfolded in front of me, email chains, transaction logs, shared documents with my father. Each file was more revealing than the last. But one stopped me cold, a folder labeled L-Shift. I clicked. The first document was a plan, detailed, methodical. A timeline of my supposed financial collapse, steps to transfer my assets, pressure points they planned to use to convince me to hand over access. My father's signature appeared on nearly every page. And there it was, the note from the fridge, scanned as part of a psychological pressure strategy. They had practiced it, calculated it, and Hale, he had been orchestrating it. It was all the proof I needed. The betrayal wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't desperation. It was a plan, one built on the belief that I was still naive, still breakable. They thought I would fold. They assumed dependency. They assumed weakness. They assumed wrong. When I returned home, the sun was up, and the house buzzed with the soft, false warmth of morning routine. My dad sat at the table again, sipping coffee. My mom hummed while wiping the counters. And for the first time, they looked small to me. Small in their schemes, small in their fear of losing control. I set my laptop on the table and opened the file. The screen glowed with their signatures. My father glanced at it, then looked up sharply. "What's this?" he asked, his tone wavering just a fraction, the first crack in his armor. "Your plan," I said. "All of it." His face drained. My mother's humming stopped. "Lila," she whispered, "you don't understand." "Don't." I cut in. "Not today." My father straightened, trying to recover his authority. "Where did you get that? You had no right." "You had no right," I said quietly, and something in my voice made him freeze. "No right to touch my accounts. No right to fake my signature. No right to decide how much of my life I'm allowed to own." His jaw worked, but no sound came. Hale had probably assured him I'd never find out. But I had, and now the room felt different. The power had shifted, palpable as electricity. I pulled out a second document, my own countermove. A revised contract. Legal. Binding. and already signed by me and notarized by someone Hale didn't know I had on retainer. It reclaimed everything they tried to take. Their influence over my finances, gone. The property they had attempted to reassign, restored. And more importantly, it included a clause restricting them from managing or accessing any of my assets ever again. My dad's voice finally cracked through the air. "You can't do this." "I already did." My mom sank into a chair, whispering my name like a prayer. "We were trying to protect you. You don't know how dangerous the world is." I shook my head. The only danger I've faced lately was in my own house. Silence rippled through the room, heavy and bare. For a moment, I almost felt the weight of what I'd lost, the illusion of parents who cared more about me than what they could control. But illusions are easy things to mourn. Truth is harder, sharper, and cleaner. My father looked away first. His shoulders deflated, a man suddenly aware he'd been cornered by someone he never expected to outmaneuver him. And in that moment, the confrontation was over. Not loud, not explosive, but final. Something broke in the quiet between us, and something else bloomed in its place, a freedom I hadn't known I'd been aching for. I packed my things slowly, not out of anger but clarity. When I stepped outside, the air felt different, cooler, cleaner, like the kind of morning that comes after a storm finally bleeds itself dry. I sat in my car for a long time, breathing, letting the quiet victory settle in my bones. Before I drove away, I looked at the camera I had set up on the dashboard earlier. I hit record, and for the first time, I spoke directly to the people who had been listening to my story all along. "If you're still here," I said softly, "thank you. There's more to tell, and I want you with me for all of it. So hit like, subscribe, whatever you need to do. I promise the calm after the storm is just the beginning." I paused, letting my eyes drift toward the horizon. "Funny thing about storms," I added. "When they pass, the world gets quiet. And in that quiet, roots finally get a chance to grow deeper. I think mine just found the soil they needed. And then I drove, leaving the house and the ghosts inside it behind."